Journal reporter Noah Kalabach stops by the show to talk about a recent veto Mayor Keller issued, a motel that closed down on Central, and a new face that may be running for governor here in New Mexico. Also, the latest attempt to allow New Mexico voters to decide on whether legislators should be paid a salary appears to be stalled and possibly dead for this year's 60-day session. And Carlos Santana is announcing a new album ahead of his tour this year. From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Friday, February 24th, 2025. And I'll have more on those stories, plus a look at the Journal's other headlines and Albuquerque's weather forecast on the other side of this break.
This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, we've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. We work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join us in our mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years.
Between Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller vetoing a measure that would reallocate funding from the rail trail, to the city of Albuquerque closing down another motel, and a new face emerging in the 2026 gubernatorial race here in New Mexico, Albuquerque Journal reporter Noah Kalabach has been keeping busy. Noah joins me now to discuss these three stories. Noah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Gino.
So Noah, obviously a lot of ground for us to cover here, but let's start with Mayor Tim Keller's veto of the rail trail funds. The purpose of this was because funds for the project were trying to be reallocated somewhere else, correct?
That's correct. So today, Tim Keller signed a veto that would override a council vote for now, an amendment that would have redirected $500,000 from the rail trail project to the Ken Sanchez sports complex on the west side.
And Noah, the rail trail has been a kind of cornerstone project for the mayor's office, something they've been pursuing for a very long time. But for our listeners that aren't too familiar with what it is, what kind of details can you give us about it?
Sure, yeah. So it's a 7-mile urban loop that connects a lot of these kind of inner city corridors, and it's secured about $40 million in funding. So this $500,000 is about 1%, a little over 1% of that.
And Noah, as you laid out earlier, these funds were supposed to be reallocated to a center on the west side. Now that the mayor has issued this veto, are there any other kind of funds that could go to that facility?
Well, the mayor has proposed lobbying for it in capital outlay at the Roundhouse. And for people who don't know what capital outlay is, it's basically requests for funding from cities and counties to the state's lawmakers.
And Noah, we'll shift gears now to another story that you wrote, and it has to do with a motel closure that took place along Central. What details can you tell us about this story?
Yeah, so it's the third motel that they've shut down in 6 months in the International District. Bow and Arrow Lodge had a bunch of code compliance issues. It appears there might have been some sex work happening there. Looks like Chief Medina said there were felons with guns. Just kind of a crime hotbed. There were some statistics APD put out as well about how many shootings there had been, calls for service, things like that.
And Noah, the closure of this motel comes after a press conference that was held at the Route 66 Visitor Center, where Mayor Tim Keller really talked about an initiative to really clean up Central and address crime in the area, leading up to next year's centennial celebration for the historic road, right?
That's correct. And it isn't in my story, but I did ask the mayor following the press conference if this was done in coordination with this plan to clean up Central before the centennial. And he said it's not, but the timing is just happens to work out well.
And Noah, as far as the occupants that were in this now closed motel, it's my understanding that the city is offering them some form of support, right?
That's correct. ACS Director Jody Escobel told us that there were 21 people there when the motel was shut down, and many of the people who were displaced had friends or family, places to go to. But for the ones that didn't and were looking to stabilize their housing situations, they were, at least for the meantime, put in hotels by ACS.
And this latest closure, Noah, marks the third motel that's been closed by the city in the last 6 months. But Noah, before I let you go, I want to talk to you about one other story you worked on alongside our colleague Dan Boyd, and that was to do with former Las Cruces Mayor Ken Miyagi-Shima and a possible run for governor. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so Mr. Miyagi-Shima came by today and gave the Journal an exclusive, let us know that he's putting out an exploratory committee to possibly run for governor, and he said that he'll decide whether or not to do so by May.
And Noah, Mr. Miyagi-Shima enters the race against stiff competition as former U.S. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland announced earlier this month that she's also going to be seeking the Democratic nomination for governor of New Mexico, so could be an uphill battle for him.
Yeah, that's correct. As many of our readers know, Deb Haaland has brought in millions just in, a little over a week since announcing her candidacy. She's also racked up a lot of endorsements too. And so Mr. Miyagi-Shima knows it's going to be an uphill battle. He probably won't get the same kind of funding, but he thinks that, his tenure as an elected official in southern New Mexico can propel him to winning the primary. It should also be noted that Sam Bregman has not ruled out a run for governor, and it's kind of been a talk in circles for a while that he could run. So he will have two current elected officials who, are probably bigger names in northern New Mexico, but he feels he has a good shot to win the nomination.
So definitely should be interesting to see, Noah, how this develops as the governor's race continues to take shape. Thank you so much for sharing the latest on that and a few city developments with us.
Thanks for having me, Gino.
New Mexico's latest attempt to let voters decide whether state legislators should receive a salary has stalled in the Senate Finance Committee, making it unlikely to advance during this year's legislative session. The proposal, which is Senate Joint Resolution 1, introduced by Senator Kathy Duwig, a Democrat from Albuquerque, aims to create a 9-member commission to determine an appropriate salary level for legislators if approved by voters. However, the measure failed to move forward due to a tie vote in the committee. New Mexico remains the only state that does not pay its legislators a salary. Currently, lawmakers receive a daily per diem intended to cover food and lodging expenses during the session, which will increase from $202 to $247 per day in March. Additionally, they can opt into a legislative retirement plan that has expanded in recent years. Despite these benefits, many lawmakers have resigned in recent years due to financial and personal challenges, some citing the unpaid nature of the position as a major burden. Supporters argue that offering a salary would attract a more diverse range of candidates and remove financial barriers from those who wish to serve. The idea of paying legislators has been debated for over a decade, with organizations like Common Cause New Mexico supporting the proposal as a way to make public service more accessible. However, opposition remains strong, with some lawmakers, including Senator George Munoz, a Democrat from Gallup, arguing that a salary would not necessarily improve the quality of legislators, suggesting that it could instead encourage people to run primarily for financial gain. Others, like Senator Nicole Tobiasen, a Republican from Albuquerque, believe that the current system already fosters diversity and public service-oriented participation.
I think part of it is it's always awkward when you're talking about legislators voting to increase their own salaries. I think that's part of the dynamic here and has been in recent years.
My colleague Dan Boyd is the Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief and has been covering the legislative session.
I do think that with some of the newer members of the legislature, maybe there might be more willingness, more openness to this idea. This kind of has been part of a debate with a few other measures also intended to modernize the legislature, including hiring full year-round staff for lawmakers. This one of paying them has been a sticky one in particular. A lot of Republicans have opposed the idea and kind of say, we're a volunteer legislature. We're not in it kind of for the money, here to make laws.
Although a similar proposal is expected to be introduced in the House before the bill filing date, it would still need to pass through the same Senate Finance Committee that halted the original measure. Given the lack of sufficient support, the effort to provide legislative salaries in New Mexico appears to be unlikely to succeed this session. Multi-Grammy award-winning guitarist and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee Carlos Santana has announced the release of his retrospective album Sentient, set to drop on March 28th via Candid Records. The album highlights Santana's decade-long musical journey, featuring 11 remastered tracks, including 3 previously unreleased songs. Among the standout collaborations on the albums are recording with legendary artists such as Michael Jackson, Smokey Robinson, Miles Davis, Paulo Rusilli, Daryl DMC McDaniels, and Cindy Blackman Santana. The first single from Sentient, a never-before-released Sentient version of Smokey Robinson's Please Don't Take Your Love, was released today. Santana explained that the album's title reflects his deep spiritual beliefs, emphasizing enlightenment, clarity, and positivity over darkness and ignorance. Albuquerque Journal arts reporter Logan Beitman had a chance to sit down with Carlos Santana, and he shared with me earlier what he learned.
I mean, he just said he's so grateful, not so many musicians can have such a cast of characters that they've worked with,
By grace, I'm able to be center stage with Run DMC, Michael Jackson, 2 songs from Michael Jackson, Stranger in Moscow, and one that he actually sings on it, which is like Don't Let Go of My Hand, and one with Smokey Robinson, 304 with Miles Davis. Not that many artists can have that kind of a company around themselves.
So he's had a great life. We actually spoke for about 20 minutes, and we're going to, release the full interview closer to when Santana's coming to Albuquerque. Albuquerque.
In addition to his album release, Santana is preparing for his highly anticipated global Oneness tour. Despite suffering a broken finger last month, he reassured fans that he is nearly fully recovered and that the injury will not affect his performances. As part of the tour, Santana is scheduled to perform at his Legislato Amphitheater in Albuquerque on April 19th. If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on the Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. In other headlines from the newsroom, the Trump administration has frozen millions in already approved federal grants meant for soil health and water conservation projects here in New Mexico. The funding pause affects Environmental Quality Incentive Program grants and other agriculture-related incentives, causing financial uncertainty for farmers and conservation groups. While the funds were initially approved by Congress in previous administration, Trump issued executive orders pausing grants for review, including those from the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. This has left farmers like Robert Lopez in limbo, unsure whether to complete conservation projects for fear they won't be reimbursed. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins announced that some funds would be released, including $20 million for environmental quality incentive programs and other related projects. However, broader reviews continue, with claims that some Inflation Reduction Act funds were misallocated. The funding freeze has also affected the nonprofit Acequia Association, which assists farmers in securing grants. The group is awaiting a $65,000 USDA reimbursement for acequia repairs, potentially stalled due to a Trump order reviewing diversity-related programs. Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez condemns the freezes as unconstitutional and warned they could threaten other federal aid, including billions allocated for wildfire recovery in New Mexico. The situation remains uncertain, with concerns that further disruptions could follow. 3 years after legalizing cannabis sales, New Mexico is moving to crack down on illicit products. The State House overwhelmingly approved House Bill 10, which would establish a law enforcement bureau within the Regulation and Licensing Department to seize and destroy illegal cannabis. The bill is now headed to the Senate. Supporters argue the measure is necessary to address regulatory gaps. Cannabis Control Director Todd Stevens reported that 22 to 24% of current licensees have some form of illegal activity, and a state commission found that organized crime groups from Mexico and China are exploiting the industry to launder money. If signed into law by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, the new Law Enforcement Bureau would consist of 6 agents and a bureau chief. With just under 30 days left in the legislative session, lawmakers are pushing to finalize the bill. And in sports news, the Mountain West has released its 2025 football schedule, marking a new era for the University of New Mexico under first-year head coach Jason Eck. The Lobos, who are 5-7 in 2024, will face a mix of departing and remaining conference teams, with 4 of their league matchups against programs set to leave for the Pac-12 in 2026. UNM's season opens up with a challenging non-conference slate, including a first-ever meeting at Michigan on August 30th, followed by a home game against Idaho State on September 6th, and a road trip to UCLA on September 13th. The Lobos' Mountain West schedule kicks off at San Jose State on October 4th and includes key home matchups against Nevada on October 18th and Utah State on October 25th, where former UNM coach Bronco Mendenhall returns with his new team. The season wraps up with games against Colorado State on November 15th, Air Force on November 22nd, and San Diego State on November 29th. Broadcast details and kickoff times have not yet been announced, and game dates remain subject to network decisions. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect sunny skies with a high near 58, and for this evening partly cloudy with a low around 29. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. I'm Gino Gutierrez. The Leading News will be back on Monday.